Welcome to the center of political life. You are now in Ottawa, the national capital of Canada. Take a good look around. Some buildings are simply bricks and mortar. These buildings represent the base of our democracy. They symbolize a gathering place of our thoughts, our plans, and our needs. Here is the starting point, a birthplace on a timeline of the life of our nation. People from all over Canada come here to talk, meet, share ideas, and provide direction for all Canadians from coast to coast to coast. You're about to see from a tourist perspective what lays behind these walls and doors of what is commonly referred to as the Centre Block. This is the main building and the center of attention on Parliament Hill. There are 5 main areas where we will visit. They are the House of Commons, the Senate, the Library of Parliament, the Memorial Chamber, and the most outstanding feature of the building, the Peace Tower. On the east side of the Centre Block building is the Senate Chamber. In 1864, the Canadian founders of Confederation worked out a blueprint for our Constitution. To make sure that legislation received careful consideration, the founders were convinced that Canada's Parliament would need 2 houses. The Senate was to be, in the words of Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, a place of sober second thought. The Senate has legislative powers similar to those of the House of Commons. The duties of Canada's Senate include examining and revising legislations, investigating national issues, and representing regional, provincial, and minority interests. Prime Ministers normally choose members of their own party to be senators, though they sometimes nominate independents or members of the opposing parties. In practice, a large number of the members of the Senate are ex-cabinet ministers, ex-provincial premiers, and other eminent people. Today, Canada's Senate consists of 105 senators from a wide variety of backgrounds and from every province and territory. Its membership is about 1/3 the size of that of the House of Commons, and it operates at about 1/5 of the cost. Although the approval of both houses is necessary for legislations to become law, the Senate rarely rejects bills passed by the democratically elected Commons.
So here we are in the Senate foyer, and it's a bit of a deja vu from the other side, and that's simply because it's once again a very similar function. This is the foyer outside of the Senate, and people can wait for the senators or anyone who's working at the Senate to meet up with them. Now the biggest difference that we can obviously see are the portraits all around the room here. And so they're portraits of past and current kings and queens of Canada, also past and current kings and queens of England. So this is basically the direct link that you see to our system of government, which is a constitutional monarchy. So the Queen of Canada is officially the head of state of Canada, which would be Queen Elizabeth II. But our Governor General officially names all of our senators by suggestion of the Prime Minister, so really it's both. And so what you find is that because the Governor General represents the Queen, because the senators are named by the Governor General, it's the link between the Queen and the senators, which is why we find that the Senate is red being a royal color. And we also find that's why the portraits of the monarchs are on this side of the House of Parliament, whereas on the other side we saw, for example, all of the portraits of the Prime Ministers and the other democratically elected positions. So that's one of the first, I guess you could say, segues into what we'll be talking about when we get to the Senate, and about how the Senate works, how they come to be, and their link to the monarchy in that sense. Now, if we look around the room, once again we see a lot of sculpture, not as ornate certainly as the House of Commons foyer, but a lot of sculpture that talks about the history of Canada. That's mostly pre-Confederation history. If we look just below the ceiling, and we can see the border along the main area there. Any of you familiar with the Battle of the Plains of Abraham will not recognize the faces, but recognize the names of Generals Montcalm and Wolfe, so the French and English generals of that battle. If you look on this side, we can see Sir John A. Macdonald, so Canada's first Prime Minister. Between the 2 pointed arches here, you can see there are 4 faces and they have no historical significance whatsoever. As I've been mentioning, or as I mentioned in the House of Commons foyer, the sculpture here at Parliament is an ongoing process. For example, if you look on the columns here, you can see faces on these sides On the other sides here, you can see that there's just blocks that are waiting to be carved. Most of the work in this room here was done in the 1950s by a man named William Osterhoff. He was the predecessor of Eleanor Milne, who had done a lot of the work in the House of Commons foyer. And who knows, maybe he was with his buddies one night, maybe over a pint, they decided, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if we put ourselves in the walls? Now, needless to say, Parliament actually has this rule that artists aren't allowed to put any references to themselves or depictions of themselves in their work. Sculptors aren't even allowed to sign their work in terms of that. So putting four faces in or putting your face in the wall, kind of a no-no. But you know, Parliament didn't have to know it was going to happen, right? You can imagine it could have easily been a situation where it's opening day, people weren't expecting to see the faces, they walk in and go, wow, you know, the sculpture looks great, what a great project. Hey, wait, we didn't commission those four faces. Hey, wait, they look a lot like our sculptor and his three assistants. Needless to say, Parliament wasn't too impressed. It's red, there's the major color difference there. Once again, the red representing the monarchy, Canadian monarchy. We can see that there are a lot fewer seats here in terms of the chamber. The chamber is a lot smaller, and I will talk a bit about that.
They look more comfy.
You know, I've sat in both of them. I don't know if I could say that one is more comfortable than the other. They're each special in their own way. But if we look at the end, we can actually see there are more comfortable chairs at the end. There are 3 thrones here in the Senate rather than in the House of Commons. So I wanted to talk briefly about these aspects of what makes the Senate different from the House of Commons, the role it plays, kind of because it's sort of like the great Canadian enigma. You don't see a lot of it in the media, so I'd like to explain it a bit. And then we'll talk a little bit about the room too. So first of all, one of the major differences we can see in the Senate are the 3 thrones at the end of the room rather than 1. And this goes back to me explaining that the Senate represents the monarchy, more or less, in our system of a constitutional monarchy. So in the House of Commons, we have 1 throne. That's for our 1 speaker who is democratically elected, and that's that. But obviously, we need a place for the Queen in our parliamentary system. And actually, by British tradition, any representation of the monarchy is not allowed on the floor of the House of Commons while it's in session. So it's kind of by default, you can almost say that the Senate needs to be able to accommodate our head of state. So the largest throne in the back is for our head of state, officially Queen Elizabeth II. The last time she sat there was in 1977, so now it's pretty much exclusively used by the Governor-General, who is a representative. The front throne is for the Speaker of the Senate. So like a Speaker in the House of Commons, there's one here, and he's the one that's in charge on a day-to-day basis of making sure everything's going smoothly. Realistically, the Governor-General comes here 4, maybe 5 times a year. She comes here for royal assent, the final step in a bill becoming a law, where she'll sign the bill and become a law. She'll also come for, say, speeches from the throne or those types of events. But otherwise, she pretty much stays out of the Senate. So that's why we see 3 thrones here rather than 1. Another major difference that we find in the seats here is that there are a lot fewer seats in the House of Commons. There's 105 seats here in the Senate. There's 308 in the House of Commons. So a big difference. And the reason for this is it's a completely different system of representation and how they select senators. So in the House of Commons, I was explaining it's representation by population. That means that 1 member of Parliament represents about 100,000 Canadians. Now, the problem with this, or the issue with this, I guess you could say, is that I'm sure many of you know, 50% of Canada's population lies between Windsor in Ontario and Quebec City in Quebec, Golden Horseshoe. So if you do the math, you can figure that over 50% of the seats in the House of Commons represent not only central Canada, but south central Canada. But we represent huge tracts of land that have concerns that are very different from central Canada. Where do we get our say in terms of things? So in the Senate here, what they do is they have a system of representation by region. They don't take population into consideration at all. The West has 24 seats, Ontario has 24 seats, Quebec has 24 seats, the Maritimes have 24 seats. Newfoundland has 6 because they came after Confederation or after the Senate was created. And each of the territories has 1 seat. So you find that the only time that the seat number would change is if a province were to join or leave Confederation. So the last time there was a change here, we added a seat in 1999 for Nunavut. But otherwise, it remains rather constant. The other thing I wanted to touch briefly upon were senators and the selection process in terms of that. Obviously, it's a huge debate going on right now in terms of the current government that we have talking about an elected Senate, but currently our senators are appointed by the Governor-General, but officially or by suggestion of the Prime Minister. So realistically, it's more fair to say that the Prime Minister puts forth a list, and if the Governor-General ever felt that the Prime Minister was abusing his power, then she would step in and act as a check and balance. But to be a senator, there are only 3 requirements. The first one is to be a Canadian citizen. The second one is to be between the ages of 30 and 75. So that means that when a senator serves a life sentence, quote unquote, it's until their 75th birthday. The third and final requirement, which is an old law that has not been amended, is that originally senators had to own at least $4,000 worth of land in the region that they represented. So it was the idea of making sure that they had land there, and previously it was also to guarantee that they had a certain income to be a senator, but obviously this is something that isn't taken into consideration anymore. Now, what's interesting in terms of being able to appoint different people to the Senate, the idea is regional representation, but also representation of minorities. In this sense, you find that there are more women that are in the Senate. A third of the Senate are women, whereas 20% of the Senate of the House of Commons is female. You find there are more visible minorities in the Senate as well. But one of the most interesting things that I find in terms of the background of the Senate is the diversity of careers and experiences that the senators have. If you look at the House of Commons, and they do a fantastic job, most of them have a history of being either a politician or in business or in law or in those types of things. And you do find people like that in the Senate here too. But you also find people where they have to run for a political office, they either might not get elected or they just aren't interested in running. We have people here that are involved in education, in consulting. We have Frank Mahovlich, who used to play for the NHL. We have an Aboriginal hunter who also sits in the Senate. So you find that there are a bunch of people with a diversity of opinions. And what's really neat is when you consider that the House of Commons and the Senate have to pass a bill together, it means that ultimately as Canadian citizens, we're just getting more perspectives from a variety of people with a lot of really good experiences relating to potentially where these laws come from, which means that we aren't just letting the doctors and the lawyers and the businessmen make all of the decision in one of the chambers. And I mean, I guess that's slightly personal, but it's one of the neat strengths of the Senate as it is currently. If we look around the room, once again, we can see a huge influence of the First World War. The tableaus that we see on the walls here all depict different scenes from Canadian involvement in the First World War. So once again, the influence as the building was being constructed. If we look up top, we can see symbols of countries that are considered to have helped Canada on the road to Confederation. So we can see England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, France up there. The gold, the maple leaves represent Canada. The gold up there is real gold, but it's so thin, it's gold leaf, that if you took all of it, you could maybe make a ring out of it. Maybe. My favorite part of the room, though, are the chandeliers. The chandeliers were rumored to be a gift from Russia, and they weigh about, they're made out of bronze, and they weigh about 2 tons each. Now, by my calculations, a baby elephant weighs 1 ton, so each one of these chandeliers is like hanging 2 baby elephants from the ceiling. My favorite fact about Parliament. Are there any questions? I'm not sure what the specific event going on is right now, but they've actually set up the Senate for a specific speech or event. So these are just cards for where different people are going to be sitting. It's name cards. And normally all these chairs here in the middle you don't see. You see desks in the middle very similar to the House of Commons. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have a setup similar to like this for the speech from the throne and those types of events too, just to accommodate more people. Normally you'll find that, for example, the justices of the Supreme Court will be sitting in the middle here in the main part for presentations.
So the Governor General then never hangs out in the House of Commons?
No, never. If she actually wanted to go watch the debates, they would have to say sorry that she couldn't.
And what's the logic behind that?
Well, it actually goes back to just before the Revolution in Britain, and King Charles I, when he was upset with a bunch of decisions that were going to be passed by about 4 or 5 MPs in the House of Commons, he sent his army onto the floor of the chamber to get these members of Parliament. Now, the members had left for the day. They knew what was coming, and they made sure they were out. But what basically happened at that moment when the king sent his army on, as members of Parliament realized, we need to be divided. We can't have the monarchy influencing decisions that we're trying to make for the good of the people. And basically, it was right after that that led to the revolution. King Charles I was beheaded. But in that sense, it started that aspect of the monarchy is not allowed to get in the way, or influence, I guess you could say.
But they do need to be involved in the final approval?
Exactly. The third and final step of a bill becoming a law is the Governor General signing it. Since 1931 in the Statute of Westminster, Governor General has never declined a bill, and it's now tradition and precedent that if the House of Commons and the Senate pass a bill, the Governor General would not sign a bill. So we find this is sort of the last 2 steps where the Senate approval comes in and also where the Governor General signs and gives royal assent.
And sorry, last question.
How
often has the Senate blocked something that has been passed by the House of Commons?
I couldn't give you a statistic right off the top of my head. What you find is that most often the Senate won't deny a bill outright. What they'll say is, look, we believe in these 3 amendments. They'll send it back to the House of Commons, and if the House of Commons approves those amendments, then the bill has just become better overall, and then it'll pass. Sometimes the Senate will say no to something. There's different ways that they've done it. For example, in 1990, the Brian Mulroney's government tried to pass a law making abortion illegal in Canada. The Senate just outright said, no, we're not going to support that. That bill is not going to pass. Sometimes, though, it might be a different issue. Like, for example, when Brian Mulroney's government wanted to pass NAFTA, or wanted the country to join NAFTA, what they did, or no, it was the GST, sorry, the GST. And what they did is the Senate said, look, we don't know if we should pass this. We think this should go to the public first. And so what they did is they said, we're not going to pass it unless there's an election, the government is re-elected, they pass the bill again, and then it's technically got the will, the people want it to be that way. So the Senate can use their power in different ways. Obviously, it's not a day-to-day thing, which is probably a good thing. It means the government's doing their job in that sense, that the Senate doesn't have to block it. But they have, historically. Yeah. Any other questions? We're good?
Can the public watch the debate?
Yeah, we have public galleries here and also right above. They're smaller galleries because the House of Commons is bigger. But when the Senate is sitting, they sit 3 days a week, and the other days they do committees. Yeah. So you can always come and watch their debates.
So are they sitting tomorrow?
Not tomorrow because it's constituency week. Once again, all the members are gone. But yeah, next week, the week after that, they'll be back. Yeah. So follow me, please. We'll head to the conclusion. Downstairs is where you can find the washrooms, the water fountains. If you left your coats downstairs, it's where we began, so just over there. Over this way is the boutique, if you are so inclined. If you go down this way, you can also see the rotunda. We walked through it on tour, and you're more than welcome to go and take a look. It's also known as Confederation Hall, so you can see all the coats of arms of all the provinces and territories and the sculptures. So it's quite neat. If you have a green ticket, if something was confiscated from security and you'd like it back in the near future, just head across the rotunda. There's a kiosk there, Smiling Constable. They can help you out with whatever you need. As well, there's a kiosk where you can leave comments on how you found the tour. I always like to say if you enjoyed the tour, once again, my name is Meg. If you didn't, my name is Bob. As well, if you've had enough parliamentary fun for the day, feel free to head into the rotunda and turn left. There's an exit right there. If you have any questions, feel free to come and talk to me afterwards. As you've heard, I can talk about Parliament at length. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming on the tour today. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about Parliament, the history of it, and how it works. And enjoy the rest of your time here in Ottawa, you guys.
Thank you.